Well, good morning, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Now, I'm going to ask you to do something to start today, and it'll become clear quite soon why I need to get you to do this now. So I want you to imagine you actually leave the room now. I don't want you to leave the room now, but I want you to imagine that you're leaving the room now, and somebody turns to you and says, well, what's your first impression of Virginia? What's your first impression of Virginia? So just turn to the person next to you and have a conversation about that just for a sec. Okay. So can I hear a few? I've done this exercise a few times, so I'm ready. So can I hear a few, just shout out a few words that are coming into your mind when you talked about, I know you were talking about something there, so what were the things you were saying?
Confident.
Confidence, okay. What else? What's that?
Nice suit.
Thank you. Nice suit. So you noticed the suit. Yes, it's kind of hard to miss this suit, isn't it? Okay. What, if anything else, were you saying? Charming, personable. Well, thank you. I'll pay you later, those people who lovely comments. But I want to take this a little bit further now, because what you've got there is a series of impressions that have happened inside your head. And I didn't ask you to think about those until I just gave you the question, but it was still happening inside your head at some level. So I want to take that a little bit further now, and I want you to talk to the same people again, please, and just say, so what was it that gave me that impression? Because at this stage, it's just an impression. What was it about Virginia that gave me the impression that she was confident or that she was personable? Have a talk about that. Okay, thank you. So now what kinds of things are you talking about? So let's hear about what you were saying now. Somebody.
We were talking about your accomplishments, and that you were being referred by Gary.
Okay, so this is important. So you're going to get tips all the way through here. You have a very senior executive introducing me. So I get what's called attached credibility. If somebody has actually introduced me and I am now speaking, I get some credibility from their introduction and from what they've talked about. So that's really relevant. Remember that. What else were you talking about?
You looked pretty comfortable standing there.
Okay, so I look comfortable standing here. So what is it that I'm doing that makes me look comfortable standing here? So I know I'm drilling down here, but this will be interesting for you to think about. So what's making me look comfortable?
Your body language.
My body language. What, if anything else?
Facial expression.
My facial expression.
Eye contact.
My eye contact. Okay. My posture. Okay, so now we're getting down to actually how we really assess ourselves as human beings. And you may not think this is happening inside your head with your colleagues and people around you all the time, but it is. So we get impressions about people. So what's the point I'm making with this exercise? We get impressions about people very fast. They're often made subconsciously. But when we actually look at what creates those impressions, it's down to our behavior, which we all control. It's how we look. It's what we say. It's what we do. So on the topic of International Women's Day and the theme this year of Each for Equal, what you talk about, how you look, what you say, what you do in relation to all things gender equality really counts and has an impact on those around you. And so it's important to bear in mind that each one of you makes an impression around that topic and can create some change around that topic. And that's what I'm personally passionate about. So one of my favorite quotes is on the next slide. You cannot not influence. Think about that. So by the very fact that you're in the room or you're in an interaction with somebody means you're going to be having an influence. Even if you do not open your mouth to speak, you will still be speaking. So on this topic today, what I'd like to talk about, first of all, is to give you an idea of where we are in Australia on this, on gender equality, and there's a lot I could say here. So I've touched on 4 areas that I think will be interesting for you. Some of them as well based on my international experience. I run an international business. So some of them based on some tidbits I've picked up overseas. And then I'm going to talk more specifically back to, and I want you to remember this exercise that we've done to start with, what's my role here? What can I do in relation to doing my part to create gender equality for men and for women? This needs to work both ways. I think this nicely encapsulated this quote, but this quote nicely encapsulates what I'm talking about. So, briefly, why am I here talking to you about this? How did I get to this point? You heard some of my credentials through Gary, but how did I get to be here? So when I was a young woman a long time ago in London, I worked for a company called KPMG. They used to own this building, in fact, didn't they, KPMG? And what I found very quickly as a career woman, I was very fortunate. I actually found what I wanted to do very early on. And I've been a round peg in a round hole, and I'm very grateful for that. But that meant that I was wanting to be very careful about making sure I could hold on to whatever I did career-wise, because I really loved it. And looking back to the time when I started my career, there were a lot less options for women then than I'm pleased to say there are now. So I had to be really mindful about that. Now, Anne-Marie Slaughter, who talks about this whole topic of sharing care and career in a book called Unfinished Business, says that your choice of life partner is one of the most important decisions you will make. Now, that's obviously true for a whole range of reasons, but it's particularly true when it comes to all things gender equality. So when I met my now husband, and we celebrate 31 years in marriage this year, so I'm personally very proud of that, we had conversations before we got married because I was about what we would do if and when we had children, because I was keen to make sure that there wasn't going to be an assumption made that I would be the one to stay at home and do all that, and he would be the one to go to work and do all that. And actually, he didn't want that either. But I wonder how many of those conversations are actively happening in households, and there'll be more said about that a little bit later on. So then I did become a parent, and a parent not only to a daughter, but also to a son. So then I became aware of the responsibilities I have as a parent, and again, I'll share some things about this later on, to enable gender equality for them in their choice, whatever those choices are. And again, one of my proudest achievements is that both my son and my daughter at different times have said to my husband and I that we are role models for them in actually having a career that we love and actually being involved parents. So that's something I'm very proud of. So when I became a parent, though, it's challenging. Can you raise your hand if you're a parent in this room, just so I get a sense? Okay, so quite a lot of you are parents. So you know what I'm talking about when this is a challenging thing to sometimes navigate. Worthwhile, absolutely, and challenging. And I read a book at around the time that I was new to becoming a parent, and this is the name of the book. It was actually made into a movie. I don't know how she does it. And it told the story of a young woman living in London trying to navigate career, family, partner, herself. And I laughed and cried my way through that book and realized that many of the clients that I was coaching, the organizations I was working with, were struggling with the same kinds of tensions about how you make all of that work. And that was how How Do You Do It was born. And my passion for gender equality has been all the way through my life. But now what we spend our time doing at How Do You Do It is if you have a career and a family and you work in an organization, making it work. So that gives you a little bit of background. So let's go into what we're doing today. And first of all, I'm going to start by giving you a broad brush touch on a few areas of things that are really influencing gender equality in Australia at the moment. So these are the areas I'm going to touch on. So societal norms to start with. I heard this beautifully explained at an All About Women conference at the Opera House a few years ago by a woman who was talking, and she said, we are actually marinating, much like our meat on the barbecue or our fish on the barbecue. We're marinating in a society that has particular norms, and it has particular expectations of what women are supposed to do versus men are supposed to do, what boys are supposed to do versus girls are supposed to do, what mothers are supposed to do versus what fathers are supposed to do. We have all those kinds of expectations, and they impact the organisations in which we work, they impact the managers with whom we work, and they impact us as individuals. So let's have a look at some of the things that are happening in Australia, and the facts, I think, speak for themselves. These are all facts. Now, this is not a happy story for women or men, because what this is really telling you is that for women, you are at the moment spending a lot more of your time in unpaid work. You're the people who are carrying more of the part-time work and all the labels that come with that. And as men, you're given far less opportunity to get involved in the things, and I'll talk to this later, that men are saying they want to be a lot more involved in, which is having a life and being involved in the lives of their family if they have a family, but if not having a family, wanting to work flexibly for their own reasons. So this actually doesn't work well for either party, but this is what's happening at the moment. Now, my daughter sent me a piece of research last week, which was quite interesting. She tends to keep me up to date with these things, which I much appreciate. And it's based on millennials, because there's a real view that with the millennial population coming through, and by 2025, the estimated view is that 75% of our workforce, 75%, will be millennial. So where are they on gender equality? What do you think? So, talk about each are equal. There's a lesson for all of us here. We all have a role in education of ourselves and others in terms of who does what. So the gender equality movement, if you're talking to millennial men, they are expecting, wanting that for their colleagues at work, but it's not translating at the moment into home or unpaid work. So what does that mean? That women are still taking on more of that, which gives them less energy and time to focus their energy on their career, and vice versa. So moving on to education, which was another one of my topics here, and this is education both from a school and a home perspective. There are two parts to this. Now, in my role as being heavily allied with the Australian Gender Equality Council, I've come across a very interesting academic. His name is Dr. Terence Fitzsimmons. So does anybody know of him? Okay. He does some very interesting research. He's also a speaker on gender equality, both throughout Australia and overseas. So he really knows his stuff. And he, along with AGEC, the Australian Gender Equality Council, and an alliance of the Girls' Schools of Australia, have just done a groundbreaking study. Now, what were they looking at? Previously, people have looked at confidence levels of boys and girls in a mixed education environment. And all the research that's been done has shown that girls are less confident in that environment. So what he did was he did a groundbreaking piece of research which covered over 10,000 students in year 7, and he looked at what happened when you put them into a single-sex education and compared their levels of confidence then. Now, what do you think he found? What do you think? So he's actually extending this research far more broadly to see what other what else they need to look at here to really confirm some of their findings here. But what they're finding is there's no difference. When you take out that environmental factor and you put boys and girls into separate in educational environments, their confidence levels are the same. Interestingly as well, their motivations for their career are the same in terms of they want to do something that's using their talents. They want to do something that's secure and will give them security and motivation going forward. That's the same too. So what's happening here? Like, what else is happening here? So let's shed a little bit more light on that. These kind of blew me away when I heard these. So the reality is that boys' schools actually take up, well, they are given 1.5 times more physical space and 3 times more play space than girls' schools. That's just what's happening in those single-sex schools. Which is why, and I'm going to give a big tick to SunCorp here, the alliance that you have with Netball Australia and the encouragement you have with the Confidence Girls Foundation in terms of encouraging young girls to play netball is significant in his research. That sport is one of the things that adds to confidence levels. But we need space to play sport. So you're a parent, right? Just raise your hands again if you're a parent. Okay, raise your hands again if you get your kids to do chores. Are they at the stage when you can get them to do chores? I know there's a lot of kicking and screaming involved in getting kids to do chores, but you're trying at least. What chores are you giving to who? Because what this study found was that the boys were being given the outside chores and they were more highly recognized than the inside chores, and that resulted in a pocket money pay gap. Yep. I think the expression on your face perfectly encapsulates the expression that was on my face when I saw that. So, and I'll come to what that pay gap is shortly. Now, this is concerning. So what Terry said was that there was no difference, and he was looking at children in a 7 to 11 year gap. Once they had made up their mind in terms of what career they were going to do in year 7, they did not change their mind. And one thing that was different about the choices and preferences of girls versus boys is that girls were choosing a career, one of the aspects of which was around helping. Right? So something's happening even earlier than that, potentially at home, and all the other impacts that we have more broadly in our society before they get to year 7. So we actually have to get in even earlier than that. And finally on this one, so what does this tell us? Parents are talking more to their boys about what they do in their careers than they're talking to their girls. We can change that. The parents in the room can change that now. So this slide is for all of us. Whether we're parents or not, we're going to be talking to other kids in our lives and having reactions to what they tell us that they want to do or what they're interested in. And we can say, like, that looks great with our face, or we can say, that's a bit odd for a girl with our face. So what's the pocket money gap? Turn to the person next to you, have a guess. Are you ready for this? Drum roll, please. Now, this is reflected in different percentages in the press, but the lowest I've seen is around 25%. And when you ask parents about this, they say, well, the outside jobs, the jobs they've got are harder. So there's a perception that those things are harder than what's being offered inside. So just be really, I can remember going back to my kids that night and saying, I know that I divided the chores between you, but did I gender discriminate there on chores or give you certain ones that were more? Unfortunately, I didn't, but I wasn't conscious enough of that, and I'm pretty conscious. So we can fall into these patterns quite unintended, but they don't really help, and they're sending quite powerful messages to people about what their role is and what they're supposed to do and how much they're valued. So bear those things in mind. Now, this next piece I'm going to share with you is not Australia specific, but I picked it up because our business is also in EMEA, we're based in London, and in Denmark. Now, it's great to be in Denmark because we're in the Nordics, we're in that favoured region where they tend to do everything really, really well, except in Denmark and certainly in Norway, their gender equality, which is fantastic across their country, is not entirely translating into their corporate world at this point. So I was at a conference in Denmark, and when I was there, I heard Gina Davis, the actor, speak. And she was talking about her foundation, which is looking at creating gender equality in the media. I was so blown away by this one that I've included it today. So she has a view that if she can see it, she can be it. And what's a great place for us to be able to see what we're capable of doing? The media. So in particular, she looked at the top 100 grossing films, and this was in 2018, but it's still highly relevant to what I'm saying. Why is that important? Because we all watch them. They're the top grossing films. And she has some software in her company that's been able to work out on screen when you're seeing men and women, what are they doing and how much have they seen and heard. So I'm going to ask you to do some more guessing here. What percentage of women do you think were employed on screen? Men were seen more, but how much more were they seen? Men were heard more, but how much more were they heard? Have a chat. Okay. So here we go. That's not fun to look at, is it? So even the big irony here that Gina was talking about, she said, and this is where we make it up. And we're making up an imagination, something that's worse than the reality. I mean, the irony of that is quite startling, isn't it? So, what's the lesson here? What are you watching? What are you letting those other people in your lives who are important to you watch? So it's just something to be conscious of, isn't it? What we're choosing to watch, what we're choosing to talk about in terms of media. Okay, because it has such a powerful impact. So let's turn to business. How are we in Australia faring when it comes to business in relation to gender equality? Again, a lot of these facts speak for themselves, and I'll talk to a couple of them. So there's a lot that I could put up here, and I've chosen a few different areas that are levers in this work in terms of gender equality. So the pay gap we know about. I mean, we're celebrating that it's the lowest that it's been. It's still 13.9%, and in your particular sector, it's the worst. So, and I know that that's something SunCorp is actively working on, and that's what you need to be hearing, that your organisation is actually actively working on it, which is reflected in the citations that Gary's also already talked to you about. Now, parental leave, that's an interesting one. This is the average across the top of the 500 largest organisations in Australia. So the 500 largest. So a lot of people won't be getting anywhere near this. In Sweden, do you have any idea what they get?
A year.
480 days. Now, I know that's a government-led initiative, so it's not, but but businesses can do their part to do something to facilitate that. And what we're seeing in Australia now is many businesses doing more and making their parental leave neutral, in terms of not primary or secondary care, and being more equal around how they share it. Another interesting stat for you here that I have to say, and the leader in this field does happen to be Sweden, is that 90 days of that 480 is mandated for the man to take. He has to take that. Did you know that? He has to take that. Now, why is that? Why are we mandating that? Anybody want to say?
To support the mothers and family unit.
To do all of that, but to enable the dads to have a negotiating power with their employer. Because what they found was, even they were allowing this, men weren't taking it. And they weren't taking it because they didn't feel it was really okay to take it. But if they're going to lose out financially, then they'll go negotiate. Now the uptake is 90%. And get this, in Sweden, for every month that a father is at home with a child, their partner's pay goes up 6.7%. So we're actually decreasing the gender pay gap. So that's why this kind of thing is very, very important. Now, this is where dads miss out. I mean, we've worked with fathers for 14 years, and we've worked with thousands of them now. And they are really tired of being overlooked here. They actually want flexible work. They want to be involved with their families, and they feel really resentful at the fact that they don't get the same treatment as women here, and they don't. So it's a high number that want it and a very low number that ask. And why don't they ask? Because they see what happens to the women when they ask. So it's really something, again, to look at. Women leaders, 23%. And a recent statistic I got through being part of Chief Executive Women, which also horrified me, was that 59% of the top ASX 200 companies do not have a woman in a senior executive line manager position. No line managers. And why is the line manager role important? Because that's the succession to CEO. So we've got a long way to go here. And we're making progress here. And I was talking to Gary about this earlier. It's very important that we look at what we are achieving here, just not what we're not. So let's have a look at what you are doing here at SunCorp. This is only some of them. When you see this WGEA employer of choice, never underestimate that. That is a huge process. The fact that you actually got that, and you've got that for 7 years in a row, really says something about this company's commitment to inclusion and diversity. Because when I talk to our clients about this, it's quite a difficult process to actually be able to achieve and get through. And you have done it not just 1 year in a row, but 7 years in a row. and your group CEO is leading your diversity and inclusion council. So that's saying a lot that you're doing that. I want to give you a big shout out for your female executives at 50%. Last slide, 23%, SunCorp 50%, huge difference. And that's role modeling from the top, that people look up and they can see men and women leading their organisation. 80% work flexibly, and looking at on Glassdoor at the comments that were made about flexibility here, which is such a key piece here, there was a lot of, it felt like it was really ingrained and embedded here in terms of the comments there, that people really appreciated it. So that's amazing, because that's not something we find everywhere that we work. And this one I've already mentioned, and you're outperforming the average on your parental leave returns. So there's a lot you're doing well. And each one of you can do a part. So, the scary quote on this. And we shake our heads. 217 years. So let's move on from the bigger picture, and let's move on to the smaller picture. Because sometimes you look at something like this and you go, well, where do we start? And the question can be, what on earth can I do? Actually, you can do more than you think. And that's what I'd like to spend the remainder of my presentation on. And I encourage you, as I'm doing this, to be thinking about the points I'm making as they are relevant to you and your lives, in your lives at home, in your working lives here. What part could you be taking out of what I'm about to go through and taking on for yourself? Because there's absolutely some things you can do. Now, these circles here are all connected. We live in that big society that has an impact on the organizations in which it works, and the managers are impacted by that organization, and the individuals are impacted by all of that. So what we're looking at here is the part that you control, which is the individual part. Can you raise your hand as well in here if you're a manager, just so I can get a sense of that? Nice and high. So, right, so we've also got some managers in the room here. So you've got a double role when we go through this part, to be looking at this from the perspective of a manager, but also from the perspective of an individual, because you're both. So I'm going to show you a model that we use on all of our workshops, and I mean all of our workshops, and we use it in all our coaching, because it's about personal responsibility. Now, you may have seen this before. I'm going to let you have a look. Can you raise your hand if you've seen this before? Yeah, so a few of you have. So we want to be above the line, don't we? We take ownership for our part because that's what we can do. Some things we need to accept because they are that way. And we need to look at what we take responsibility for. Anybody know anybody who operates underneath the surface? It's always somebody else's fault. Nothing to do with me. Or makes excuses. Or says, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Plain denial. How are they to work with? Bundles of fun, aren't they? So you don't want to be one of them. They suck the air and the energy out of a room because it's always about what somebody else has to do. So what we're going to look at here is, well, what can I do? Because that's a much more empowered position, actually. So I wanted to take you back, so I'm going to show you one other model we use, again, on all our programs. And I want you to think back to where we started this session, when I was talking about, well, I asked you to do impressions. You know, what are your impressions of Virginia? What are the reasons for that? And you came up with some quite behavioural things, didn't you? How I was standing, you know, my suit, et cetera, some of the behaviours. So look at this model in relation to this, because this is what's reflected back at you. People are doing this about you as well, just like you did this about me. It's called personality iceberg. Again, can you raise your hand if you've seen the personality iceberg before? Yes. Okay, so what do we know about an iceberg? You're right, and not a trick question. Most of it's below the surface. With a person, it's back to what we talked about earlier. A lot of us is not seen. And then there's bits we choose to show. But equally the other way around. If somebody says something to you, and this happens a lot in our work, somebody will say something to somebody, for example, who works part-time, and they'll say, oh, you're off now, are you? Lucky you, early mark. Right? Anybody had that experience? So I could see nodding around the room when, and it's not really intended, but that person's now going to go underneath the surface and worry about that for the next half an hour. Am I doing enough? You know, are they thinking I'm slacking? Are they blah, blah? That's what actually happens. So what you see above the surface is what people do, what people say, and how they look. And that is in those day-to-day interactions that can really leave a mark on what happens to the rest, which is what's happening with our thinking and what we value, what's important to us. So that's the very same person who had the comment, oh, you're leaving early, are you? Early mark. Is now going to be thinking, oh, are they thinking I'm not working hard enough? Are they thinking I'm not doing my job? Are they thinking, you know, they'll go into, and how do I know that? Because I know that from 14 years of experience of working with people like that. That's a lot of stress. And what they value is actually contribution to their team. So now they feel they're failing on that. So it's really relevant that we look at this. So what I'm going to show you now is a series of comments that we've taken because they typify situations in which people find themselves day to day around gender equality type issues. You'll recognize some of them. So it's a comment, it's the comment you see up here or something like this that we're talking about, because they happen all the time in business and they happen all the time at home, and that has an impact on people around them. So what I want you to do when I show you these, I'm going to tell you about who said each one of these, and I'm going to ask you to think about what the impact of those kinds of comments is. You might also have some other comments that you wish to share here that have been said to you. I was told by an extended family member, for example, you're actually, and you know when the word actually is in, you know you're up for something, don't you? You're actually quite, not very, quite, you're actually quite a good mother considering you work. You can see that's still not bothering me even today. I have no energy at all around that. Totally moved on. But you see, these things hurt, they stick. So you can say these, and that's why I really want to make you aware of today in terms of this each for equal, what you say and how you react to people around this stuff. Get really aware of it because it has an impact on those people that you might not see. Okay, so let's have a look. I didn't think you wanted promotion when you came back from parental leave, said to the working mother, many working mothers in fact. How was your holiday? Said to many working fathers who are just back after 2 weeks. You don't work on Friday, so I didn't think you want to come. Said by any member of the team to somebody who works on a part-time arrangement. Can't your wife take care of that? Generally said by a manager. I'm generalizing, but generally said by somebody in a senior hierarchical position to the person they're saying it to. And this is the stuff we do at home. I'm very lucky. My partner's very good. He's very helpful at home. I'm very lucky. Why didn't you just ask me and I'd do it? Said from a man to his partner. So I'm generalizing here, but we hear this a lot, otherwise I wouldn't be raising them. So what I want you to do first of all is turn to the people next to you, please, and say, what's the impact of these comments? What's the impact of these comments? Have a chat. So, first of all, can you raise your hand if you recognise these kinds of comments? If you've either heard of them, or can you raise your hand, and have a look round? So just have a look round at how many people have got their hands up. So we know this happens, right? Sometimes it's happening to you, sometimes inadvertently, or you didn't mean it, but you're doing it to somebody else. And this is how we change culture, because we change behaviour around this, and we change the way things are seen and done around here. So that's why I'm calling each one of you to be more conscious about this. Now, when we talk about impact, what are the impact of some of these? Just shout out, please, for me. What are the impact of some of these?
Offended?
People can get offended by them, absolutely.
Start to doubt themselves.
They start doubting themselves. Is this okay? I mean, we've got a mental health crisis here in this country, and these kinds of comments contribute to it.
Exclusion.
Exclusion, right? There's such a thing as exclusive networking. It's either when something happens or it's what it is. So it works for one sector of the population, that type of activity, and it really doesn't work for the other side. That's exclusive. But as is, we always get together on a Friday for drinks. Yeah? What else?
Self-esteem.
Lowers your self-esteem, absolutely. So we deal with people who, something like this is said to them, and they actually feel really guilty and stressed about it. And, you know, we go through that with them and give them techniques to manage that. But wouldn't it be nice if we weren't receiving it in the first place? Okay, so another quick check-in. What can you do about it? I'm going to go through these, but I just want some overall thoughts from you about what you can do about this kind of thing. So from three perspectives: as a manager, as an individual that might be on the receiving end of it, or a bystander who's watching it happen. Because we know that happens too, right? Somebody will say something in front of you, and there's somebody right there, and what they do or don't do can make a difference to that interaction, correct? So let's take, so as I go through these, I want you to be thinking about it from those perspectives. If you're a manager, what could you do about this? If you're the individual who's receiving this comment, or, you know, at the forefront of that, what could you do? And as a bystander, what could you do? Because those are the roles we play here. So this one, I just want to say one thing about this. This happens a great deal to, I am going to generalize here, but actually no, this has been my experience, to young women who are returning to work from parental leave. And often it's done actually with kindness, and it's called killing with kindness. It's benevolent kind of inequality. So the person is actually well-intended, and they're trying to make sure that we're not overwhelming you, you're not overloading you, and you know, all that kind of thing. So that's often where it's coming from. Sometimes it is biased. And we had company, you know, we've had examples of people saying they've been told quite point blank that after your children, you're now on the B track. You know you're on the B track. So there's a range between the two things, and yes, that's still happening. So we've got two perspectives here. So quickly, what kind of things can you do to address this if you're a manager?
Ask.
You ask. You know what they say about assume? You make an ass out of you and me. Have anyone ever forgotten that? I certainly haven't. An ass out of you and me. But here you do, you kind of do. Because you've assumed something that might have worked for you in your experience, but they're not you, actually. They're them. So you ask. What else do you do for an individual? What do you need to make sure you've done? As the individual who's in the return to work process, what do you have to do?
Tell them what you want.
Tell them what you want. Now, we say that, but we don't always do it. We kind of assume the other way around that they'll kind of know that we want to do that kind of work. Well, no. And whose career is it, by the way? It's yours. So here are some tips for what you can do on this one. Don't underestimate this one. You might be in a room where a job is being talked about. You happen to know that your colleague would like to do that kind of work. You could say, I think so-and-so would like to do that. Right, so there's a role that you can play here as well. The big one here is ask for a question. Check versus assume that you know the answer about what somebody wants to do. Look at the next one. Okay, can't your wife take care of that? What is this really saying? Now, this is said to people in a version. What are we really saying here?
Don't take the time off.
Don't take the time off to do anything like that, because that work belongs to a woman to do. And actually, the data is telling us that that is what's happening at the moment. So that's kind of the reason this one's on here. The data says that women are doing more of this. But this kind of thing doesn't help because it continues that assumption that is not really your kind of role. So as a manager or an individual there, what do you do about this? What can you do about this? Clearly delete that question. Never ask that question. But what do you need to be changing here?
How can we support you to take care of what you need?
Yes, nice. How can we do that? And as an individual, you need to be making it clear that you're going to get the work done. That's your responsibility. You've got to get the outcome. You need some flex here. So you say that, but you don't apologize about it. So, a few things you can do here. One of the most powerful things you can do here as a manager is role model it. And we talk about this, but we still don't see it enough. So if I see that my immediate leader never goes home for that kind of thing or does that kind of thing, I don't really think it's okay for me to do that. Even if they tell me it's okay for me to do that, I still don't believe it's okay for me to do that because I don't see you doing that. Yeah, and a lot of nodding here, right? So, you know, that role modeling is powerful. Okay, this one. If you're part-time, what do people start assuming if you're part-time?
You've got lower commitment.
You've got lower commitment. Part-time means partly committed. And that is absolutely not what we experience in our work. People are very committed. They just aren't going to be there as much. So what do you do about this kind of thing? What do you do about this kind of thing, where an event is organised and it's assumed again that you won't be able to come because you don't work that day? What do we do?
Invite them, ask them.
Ask them. It's not that hard, is it really? And you know what? They can say no if they can't come. But they might also say, yeah, I'd love to do that. I'll make some arrangements and change it. As managers or team members here, what else do we need to be aware of in this particular area? What else can we do?
Make it on a Thursday.
Make it on a Thursday, thank you. So you know all the answers. It's just that we don't always do what we know, do we? So here we are. Here's a few answers on this one. And individuals, a call out to you here. Be clear when you can be flexible. So we're always having conversations with people saying, well, have you told them you're prepared to be flexible for things like that you want to be involved in something like that? No. Well, how are they going to know that then? So this is a two-way street. It's not all up to the organisation and the manager to fix it or the team. It's you as well. Speaking up. I mean, this is kind of funny, isn't it? But heartbreaking at the same time. I just think it's so perfect, this picture. And we see this a lot in our rooms, right? We have dads who come in and they're like this. Okay, so this is what's happened. Their whole life has changed. They're not getting any sleep. They're totally stressed. They're worried that they're not doing enough to support their partner at home. They get into a lot of trouble if they're late because their partner has been at home. I know I used to feel just like a breastfeeding machine when I was at home to start with, is doing that, and you're just desperate for your partner to come back. So there's a lot of tension in the air at this moment. And they come in and someone says, how was your holiday? Are you serious? Or they get completely overlooked. Now, what happens here is, for the most part, if you're having a child as a woman, you're pregnant. So everybody knows, oh, sign, signal to self, person having baby. Men don't get pregnant, so we don't have that obvious sign. So we don't know what's happening with them, and a lot can be happening with them, and they get completely overlooked. And often, in our rooms, when we're having conversations about how it is for them, this is the first time they've talked about it. So what can you do here, guys? Not guys. What can anybody do here to support this situation? What do we do?
Acknowledge it.
Acknowledge it. Because men often keep this under the radar. That's their experience. They don't feel it's really okay for them to talk about it, so they don't talk about it. And then people don't know about it because they haven't been pregnant. So they're not talking, they're not speaking up. So part of the responsibility is for men to start talking about this. This is challenging, and I might need a bit of flexibility over the next little while. That's their responsibility. What about the other way around? Have a look. This one's important, the last one, even if it's fake. Oh, that's, you don't care. You're not at that stage. You couldn't really care less about children. Try and show a little bit of interest. It's like when your colleague loves a particular activity, you hate it. You still kind of go along with it, don't you? So it'll make everybody feel a little bit more seen. And, you know, we keep talking about bringing the whole person to work. That's what's going on in this person's life. So let's just try and be more mindful of reaching out to men who are in this situation, checking in with what they might need around levels of flexibility, and we'll find they're a lot more committed in this process too. Okay, now last one here. So we hear a version of this all the time. So this is our responsibility, women and men, in our lives outside of work, in our unpaid work, and there's a lot of that. And this is what we hear from women regularly. But actually, I'm lucky. That's how it's often said. My partner's very good, he's very helpful. Now, if I'm saying my partner's very good, he's very helpful, what does that mean, I believe?
It's your work.
It's my work. And they're my assistant. And actually, God help them if they get it wrong, because I'm going to be saying something about it. And that doesn't work for, and there's people laughing here, but that doesn't work very well for the partner who's at the receiving end of comments like, what do you mean you gave them that for lunch? Or you dressed them in that, or that kind of thing. That doesn't help encourage men to take this on and do it their way. Okay, so that's one part of the equation. What are you thinking about this? Are you thinking it's your job? Do you want it to be your job? I'm talking to the women here. Have you negotiated it in a different way? I have no judgment here around what, you know, there are many different versions of success here, but often it's a default position. It's a default to you. Right, for men, well, you just need to, why don't you just ask me? And I do it. So what does that mean you're thinking?
They're blind.
What's that? Blind. Okay, so this is perfect. This is the reverse. Well, I just wait to be told what to do. And it is your job, and I'm just used to doing what I'm told to do rather than thinking about it. This is the mental load. You'll probably have seen things about the mental load. And there apparently, somebody did research on all the different activities in the brain to carry the mental load that women often carry. There's a lot to do in that brain. So how are we sharing that? So I've always said to my partner, these are our children, and this is our house. And it's our shared responsibility, and we need to divvy that up between us. So what's the obvious thing you need to be doing here, guys? Communicating with your partner, preferably not in the moment of a fight. That doesn't go down very well. So the Fatherhood Institute in the UK has done research that shows that people have 5 times the number of arguments after they've had children than they had before. And every time we say that in a room, somebody says, "Is that all?" So it's just something, communication is not to be underestimated here. So finishing up here, get a job description going for unpaid work. Can't argue with a job description. If you were resourcing a project at work, you'd resource it like this. Why aren't we doing that at home? You wouldn't just start and have one person do the whole thing and delegate to the other person. You'd say, okay, who should do what, do you think, based on skills and knowledge and experience? No, we don't do that. That's silly. That's just for work. So let's think about what we can bring from work into home. And if nobody wants to do it, you share it or you pay. That's a choice. So there are things you can actively do here. Okay, so taking away today. What I want you to take away. The key thing I want you to get, and I can see from here and the way that we've been interacting, is you know what to do here. The question is, are you conscious enough so that you're actually doing it? Are you asking versus assuming? Have you checked in with your thinking about what you might be believing, and does that need changing? Do you need to negotiate paid and unpaid work in your own life and have those kinds of conversations? And the main thing I want you to get is when you're around people either at work or at home and you're talking about all things gender equality or things that relate to this, you cannot not influence. Thank you. I'm going to do one other thing. So I'm going to ask you to stand up. And the photographers, can we have you on stage for a moment? Now, I want you to be thinking in your mind about one thing that you're taking out of this that you want to do, that you might put on the pledge wall or on Yammer. One thing. I'm just asking you to do one thing. And I want you to take the each for equal pose, because this is going to go on your Yammer site or wherever you want to put it. This is the each for equal pose. And I want everybody to stand, please, in this pose, thinking about that one thing. Let's have everybody in this space.
Some people just to fill in the front there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Got to get the photography right, of course.
From the back, just in front. Anyone?
3 people from the back. Come on, down you come. You can do it. Nobody's going to fight.
One brave soul.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thinking of the thing that you're going to do. Each for equal here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, are you happy to pull a stool forward? And
Absolutely.
Now, you feel free to have the water.
Thank you. Actually, I've got one here.
You got one?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Virginia, and it was really nice that everybody acknowledged your fantastic presentation. I particularly like the pocket money pay gap data, because it kind of starts very young, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does.
Clearly that is a very real thing.
Yeah, it is.
Now, it's your turn to ask us some questions, searching and or otherwise. So feel free to fire away for Virginia or for me. Now, don't worry about a microphone, because I think you can just yell out. The acoustics are pretty good in here.
Just a hypothetical question, your advice. For organisations or groups that aren't doing a good job with gender diversity, should we be shutting down those organisations, or groups, or are there other alternatives?
I think the way I tend to focus on that is, there are 3 groups of people generally. There's the people who are for something, like say for gender equality, either as a group or an organisation. There are the people who are they're not against it, but they're not particularly doing much for it. They're kind of in the middle, they're more neutral. And there are people who are just against it. who haven't woken up to it yet and aren't ready to make a change. And where I tend to find, both with groups and with organisations, you're going to make your biggest change is actually working on the people who are already making the change, and with the groups who are neutral and can be converted to the positive. You can waste a whole lot of energy putting your time and attention into this group down here when they're really resistant to it. So that would be my best answer to that question.
No, there was another.
Focus where you can make a change, where you can really make a difference.
My question is, we talked about the pay gap. And
Yeah.
Is it relevant to all level of people? I mean, even if executive managers have this pay gap?
Yeah, that's an average pay gap. So that's an average pay gap across the 13.9%.
So it still applies in executive?
Yes. Anything else?
Just thinking about work that is gendered, so industries that we consider female and industries that we consider male. How do we go about changing society's view on that?
Okay, so what people are starting to do, for last year when I ran the AJAC panel, the Australian Gender Equality panel, we had a female pilot, a female mechanic, and a female electrician on a panel, and we were asking them about how they got into those roles. So it's when you're supposedly working into a role that's not typically taken by you. And we asked them a lot of questions about that. And what they really talked about there is what was said to them at home. So I think this does start at home, and it starts in primary school. So I actually think we need to start this in quite a practical way by getting people to go into primary schools and talking about their roles, and showing that it's men and women. So I don't know if I read about some research that had been done where they asked a whole group of children in a primary school to draw a picture of a pilot, an ambulance person, and a medic or something like that. I think it was those three, something like that. And they drew men for all of them. And then they brought in 3 women in those roles. So I think that's how we actually shift it in quite a practical way. But it's absolutely in the conversations we're having at home when people say to us, I'm interested in being a mathematician or whatever they want to do. And we say, oh, or we say, oh, that's great. Yeah, you can do that, even if we haven't seen much of that happen before.
Anybody else? Down the front.
At the summary point, Donahue, how would you go about changing that about someone or influencing someone's behaviour on that?
So if somebody's making an assumption on my behalf, is that what you mean? Yeah. I would set up a conversation with them separately and say, I'd like to talk to you about X, and I wanted to clarify what my own interests are in this particular area, so that you're clear about that and you can bear that in mind when you're allocating work, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd use it as a kind of updating you, and make a separate meeting to do that.
Somebody up the back. Oh, hang on.
I was part of a roundtable discussion with some tech companies, and something came out that I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah.
You're seeing it, Virginia and Gary, if we're doing it at all from a SunCorp perspective, and it's around a lot of tech companies now, if they get asked to speak at a conference, are taking an approach where they review the agenda, and if there's not appropriate diversity, not just gender, ethnic, whatever, diversity generally, they're taking the stance of refusing to speak unless that changes.
Yes, absolutely seeing that. Absolutely seeing that. So I was in London last year. I was at a conference, and a woman was talking from one of the large investment banks and was actually talking about their legal providers, and that they would not consider legal providers unless they had a diverse team on all levels of diversity. They wouldn't get the job. So I'm starting to see an increase, and I think that will start to shift things, because when our clients are doing it, the business starts to pay more attention. That we might actually lose business or lose money out of this. Business is going to sit up more, and I definitely see a trend coming in that direction. So that would be my experience. Gary, what about you?
One of the things that the Male Champions of Change ask of each of the male champions is that you adopt the panel pledge. So very much what you said, when you are asked to be on a panel, that you are prepared to say no if it's not going to be a reasonably gender balanced panel. Clearly, when you've got 3 as the number, it's very hard to have a balanced panel. So I kind of think that's where that 40-40-20 proposition comes in. But I got an invitation to speak at a Women in Insurance panel yesterday, and I would have said yes, but I saw that Richard Enthoven from Hollard had already accepted, so I'll say no, because they should make sure that that there are some senior women asked to speak. So it's something you've got to be really conscious of, and I think, I've got to talk to my team about adopting that as well, because the EGMs all get asked to be on panels at times, and it's an easy thing to do. It's kind of easy to look at, see who's been asked to speak and make sure there's a reasonable balance in the panel.
Gary, sorry, but what are SunCorp doing about the pay gap? It's good to see 50%, but is it going to take 217 years or whatever? Is there a target for SunCorp?
So whenever we do pay reviews, whether it's the annual review or the half-yearly reviews on STIs for the teams and the roles that have STI, we look at every socio-demographic factor in the equity of the outcomes, either in base pay and or bonus outcomes between part-time and full-time, because there's going to be a gender skew on part-time generally, between male and female, and then across age groups and tenures. So we're intensely focused on ensuring there is equity in the outcomes on base pay and STI. Now that kind of is from a starting point that is. So if there was already a gap to begin with, what that's trying to do is make sure it doesn't get worse and that we can address it going forward. But certainly when we're looking at base pay movement at an individual level, we're looking at trying to drive increases where we can that are closing that gap from a gender point of view. But again, the demographics we look at, gender, part-time, full-time, age and tenure, because often they'll kind of map across each other somewhat. So we haven't got a target, and I think that's one thing the organisation could do, agree, a target date to have zero gap, because when you have targets, you tend to focus on them and progress towards them. Because, we won't be 217 years, but it's longer than 2 minutes, and it's, probably shorter than 217 years. So I think the thing we could do is have a target. Far away.
In terms of schooling for the kids, there was a very interesting data shared by the girls were equally confident when they were being studied from a same gender school as compared to when they're studying in a co-ed school. So I, being a parent now, this question is coming in my mind because I'm sending my daughters to a co-ed school. Now, would there be a gender gap, or by me sending them to a co-ed school, am I making them less confident, or would they be having these things in their mind right from the beginning?
I think it's interesting. It's a little too early to tell, because that's 10,000 students. It was a big study, but he is extending it, and so he's saying don't jump to conclusions that means mixed education is bad, but it does mean you need to be working around some other things with that. So I think it becomes really important what your own influences are in your own home around that, and also looking at the representation in the schools that you're going to. So some of the things they talked about here is that children see the roles that people play in a school, like who's got an admin role versus who's got a teaching role versus who's got a principal role. So it's being conscious of those kinds of things when you make some of your choices around that, and also what you say to your children about what they can do and what they're capable. That's very powerful too. That's why I included home in there, because so much of this is happening it's earlier than when we get them to high school.
Amy, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Gary. I think calling out behaviours as a bystander takes huge courage and bravery, and something that maybe women generally, and I am generalising, are not as good as. And your above the line, below the line model was a really great call out. I think women are conscious of coming across as being below the line. So any advice on us how we call out
that behaviour as a bystander, but be perceived to be above the line in our culture?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one for women, this. I'm going to say that's because there's that, I don't know if you've heard of this as well, that when a woman does something like that, she's called aggressive. When a man does that, he's called assertive. So we are dealing with all those labels too. So what I talk to people about is creating, what do I call it, a human intelligent pose. I mean, that's just the mnemonic I have for it. But it really is about creating when you look in the mirror, a facial expression and a stance. So my standing up one is this, and my sitting down one, that you practice and it kind of becomes then a resting face for you, because otherwise, if you're triggered, the fact that you're triggered will show on your face. So if you can't deal with it in the moment, because you're triggered in this space and you're kind of quite angry about it, you're probably going to be, oh, she's being unreasonable, all of that get labelled. So I would suggest the tip is to take a time out on yourself and then go and speak to that person about it separately when you've calmed down and say, next time, focus on the future. Next time, what I'd really appreciate it is if you did this, because the impact that had was that. So it's dealing with it when you're calm versus when you're triggered. And if you can deal with it in the moment, it's that expression will kind of, if you've done it enough, will help. Okay?
I think there was a hand up the back. I'll come back down to you if that's okay. Was there somebody at the back I missed before? No, far away.
So with SunCorp, there's working towards this pay gap, and there's also the great flexibility
with people everywhere. Yeah.
So what other things are we planning to do going forward?
I think one of the things that became really apparent to me when we started the Champions of Change process, one of the things that system gets you to do is some sessions with, and we picked senior women, we picked high potential women that were likely to advance, and then we talked to some senior men as well, and about their experiences in the company. And while we've got lots of really good policies, it was apparent that not every leader in the company understands what they are, how they can be used. So it's one thing to have really good policies and be proud of them, albeit that I think, again, there's more that we can do with some of our policies. But it's another thing for every leader to know what they are and how they can be used, and to make sure that they're available for all of our people. And I think that was one of the really key bits of feedback. Not every leader knew all of the policies we had around flexible working, for example. So that's something that we can really focus on, making sure what we've got, everybody knows is there and how it can be used. And then the second thing is, those policies can still improve. We can still find ways to expand parental leave. We can move towards not having that concept of secondary and primary, just having a chunk of time. Not necessarily having it to be consumed in a certain amount of time, that it could be available over a couple of years rather than in one particular period. I think the other thing that we're working through is that pilot that some of the people in insurance organised last Christmas, where we had that activities week, and the parents at SunCorp could take advantage and book kids in, is clearly something that helps people manage that really long Christmas break, where you've got 4 weeks leave and 6 or 7 week break, and it kind of forces two working parents to juggle it between their leaves. So that's something we can look at how we fund that to be more institutionalised rather than just a pilot. So I think there's a lot we can still do, but starting with making sure all leaders know what's available already before we even start to improve on it.
When are we adopting Swedish practices?
I was just telling the people who are sitting near me down the front, there's another good Swedish practice they make. If you've got a dog, you're not allowed to leave your dog at home alone for more than 3 or 4 hours. There's a finite amount during the day if you're working. So dog walkers have to come and see the dog and take them for a walk, or you've got to go home. They are very advanced societies in a lot of ways.
One of the things we
Scandinavian
found
Nordic countries.
really interesting in Denmark, I mean, we've got an alliance partnership in Denmark, and they said, we love what you're doing. It's really needed here, especially for the corporate world. We're pretty good on this socially, but in the corporate world. But there isn't actually a name for working parents. There's not a Danish word for working parents. because that concept is not something that because everybody does that, don't they? It's like everybody's doing that there. So it was I thought it was just really interesting that they're trying to describe this is a program for working parents, but they don't have the terminology for that, even though they have people who need that. Quite interesting. But they are very advanced in many ways. But that's their government too, isn't it?
Any other things top of mind for anybody that you'd like to ask? Sam?
Yeah, just after some parent advice, really. So,
How long have you got?
I'm leaving it to you, Virginia.
How long have you got?
Yeah, I got a 2-year-old daughter, Lily, and went pyjama shopping at the weekend, which was a big moment. And we went to Target and looking for pyjamas. And the pyjamas for my 2-year-old daughter, the choice she's got is Peppa Pig.
Yeah.
So I went up to the boys' aisle. The choice they've got is Superman, Batman, Spider-Man. And it's like, I know, probably should be shopping at Target. Like, I should be probably go somewhere else. But since then, I've been online looking for like Superwomen and Wonder Women pajamas, and there's not a lot out there. So my question or my advice I'm seeking is, as a parent, maybe pajamas aside, what are the stuff behind? I know you're talking about role modelling, but other like kind of mistakes or other practical advice that you'd make, that you'd give to help us as parents, like raise kind of, strong, super amazing women?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. I really relate to what you were saying about the choice of pajamas. That's just one example of it, isn't it?
It's so powerful, though, I reckon. Like, sorry, but as a 2-year-old,
yeah.
Like, as a 2-year-old, your mind is so moldable. And like, Lily's so excited now for Peppa Pig and Minnie Mouse, which is great. But I'd love her to be excited about strong, amazing women.
Yeah.
I don't have that choice with pajamas here.
Yeah, no, clearly you don't. Clearly you don't have that choice with pajamas. I mean, so that's, in terms of how you raise children, that's a very big question. It takes but I'll give a couple of answers to that. So my own view, and certainly what we do in our business, is we recognise that each individual has their own version of success, if you like what's going to make them happy, what's going to work for them. And certainly with my children, so I'm talking more personally here, but also drawing on my experience, it's tuning into what it is for that child, whilst at the same time deliberately exposing them to the different choices and different opportunities that there are, versus assuming those on their behalf. So it's a real lesson again in not assuming based on what I like and what I want to do, what you might like and want to do, and not assuming that particularly based on your gender. And so being careful about what they watch, how much they watch, etc., because then you're imprinting those kinds of messages as well. So being really conscious of the choices that you make around, fundamentally things like where they go to school, but also things like who you hang out with and what messages they're sending or putting on to your children as well. So it is about you tuning into making sure you're not doing it your way for them, taking them as your lead, and then exposure and constant conversation about, well, you can do that too. Do you want to do that? You can do that. Or how about we do this? Because they might not necessarily gravitate to that. So that's just a little taste.
Thank you.
I found mixed soccer for little kids really good, Sam.
Yeah.
When, I'm very old, so when I played, there was no such thing as mixed, but it was really good. And I coached my son's team when he was kind of 5 in the sixes, and in the first year, and it was, half the team were girls and half were boys, and it was really good because the girls got in and belted the daylights out of them, and but that was really good. I think that was very levelling. Mixed sports for them when they're young, and the sports they can play mixed.
And sports was a factor that came up in the study, actually, Terry's study, that it actually is an enabler, as is domestic travel. So going on a holiday with your family is also very good for confidence levels. Just experiencing travel as a group and sport were 2 factors that really came out there. Interesting. Huh? And also having a part-time job, which your 2-year-old does not need to worry about yet.
Now, are there any last pressing questions? Because I'm mindful we've got some networking opportunities outside. No? Okay. Well, can I ask you to thank Virginia again? Thanks very much, Virginia. It was fantastic. So that brings us to the end of our International Women's Day event here in Sydney, or this bit that's in the room. So thanks very much, everyone, for taking the time to come down here this morning and celebrate how far we've come, but also acknowledge where we've got to go from here, and you can all be part of that journey. So I hope you found the session insightful and inspiring. I'm sure you did. I'm sure you'll take away at least one action to promote. So Virginia's exercise, remember that, what you were thinking about while you were doing that, because you can fulfil on that as we go outside. Very special thank you again to Virginia for sharing her inspiring story and the story of your career. And thanks very much for getting right into the Q&A, Virginia. As I mentioned, you can keep the conversation going by sharing what International Women's Day means to you, using the hashtag Each for Equal pledge on Yammer, add hashtag Each for Equal as a standing agenda item to team meetings, and reflecting on what role we all play in encouraging and fostering gender equality, diversity and inclusivity at SunCorp. So please feel free to come outside and do some networking, grab some refreshments. In the usual SunCorp style, I'm sure there's plenty of refreshments out there. You'll notice the pledge walls out there, the pre-printed cards, and you can use those for your hashtag Each for Equal pledge. And I'll whack mine on Yammer once I get back upstairs close to the network where security allows me to do that. So thanks very much for coming outside.